Jump back into the book of Exodus. It's getting good, y'all. It's getting real good. Okay, we're gonna finish up the last few verses in Exodus chapter 4, and I'm gonna be reading out of the NLT tonight. So if you wanted to follow along on the paper, you can. If you want to follow along on your brick and mortar Bible, feel free to do that too. Tonight, we're really looking at the first encounter with the king. Moses has been primed and readied. He has made all of his excuses to God, and God rebutted every one of those excuses. And now Moses is finally ready to step up and do what God has called him to do. And so tonight's, we're going to kind of do a stop-start to this lesson. Instead of reading the whole passage and then breaking it down, we're going to read a chunk, break it down, a chunk, break it down, okay? And so the first encounter with a king, the story is pivoting now. We're out of Midian, we're back in Egypt, and Moses and his brother Aaron are reunited, and it feels so good. Thank you, Linda. Thank you very much. You're the only one. I know. I want to sing it now. Corey loves it. Corey's going to be humming it all night. You could be a little nicer to me. Okay, let's start with verse 27. Now the Lord had said to Aaron, "Go out into the wilderness to meet Moses." So Aaron went, and he met Moses at the mountain of God, and he embraced him. Moses then told Aaron everything the Lord had commanded him to say, and he told him about the miraculous signs the Lord had commanded him to perform. Then Moses and Aaron returned. By the way, don't you wish you could have seen that reuniting? Don't you wish you could have seen that? And to see Moses actually explain what God had told him to do. And Aaron's response, like, what is Aaron thinking? Is he thinking that his brother got kicked in the head by one of those goats? Or is he like, let's go, man, let's do it? What's his thoughts? We don't know. Then Moses and Aaron returned to Egypt and called all the elders of Israel together. Aaron told them everything the Lord had told Moses. And I find this interesting that Moses is even not being the spokesperson even to just a group of elders, the Israelite elders. Even Aaron is the one who's speaking on his behalf at this point. They called on all the elders of Israel. Verse 30, Aaron told them everything the Lord told Moses, and Moses performed the miraculous signs as they watched. Then the people of Israel were convinced that the Lord had sent Moses and Aaron. When they heard that the Lord was concerned about them and had seen their misery, they bowed down and worshiped. Got just a few fill in the blanks there. If you need a pen, there's some pens in the bucket up here. If you wanted to just wave your hand, Corey, you might have a few pens back there. I don't know. In this passage, this first section, we see Moses and Aaron's obedience. That's what we see in this first passage, is that Moses finally obeys. Moses finally quits with the complaining, quits with the excuses, and now he's fine. He's like, all right, fine. Let's just do it. Let's just go. Let's go. How is Aaron and Moses' return to Egypt different from each other? What's the different nuances of they're both returning to Egypt. What's the nuance? What's the difference?
I wish we knew a little more about why Aaron left. So he left Egypt for some reason and came to Midian, but
I think Scripture told us in the previous chapter that God was going to send him. And so
if you watch the movie,
yeah. Cecil B. DeMille's, was that the movie, the old?
Aaron, he struck the guy too, Aaron. That's why Aaron was there in the first place.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah. We don't know, but other than I feel like God was orchestrating those steps, that God was sending Aaron. And I don't think we see that in the 40 years that Moses was in Midian that they had communication. We don't know. We don't know if they did. So we don't know if this is the first time in 40 years these brothers are seeing each other, or if they'd had Thanksgiving meal together, in November every year. We just don't know. But what's the difference? Like, there's a difference in their return. Okay, Moses is returning the disgraced Hebrew son that was raised in the palace. He's returning from his disgrace because God had told him that the people who wanted to kill you were gone. But it doesn't mean that no one remembered who you were. People talk. If you go home, if I go home and visit my home church, there will be people that remember things that I did when I was a teenager. And I'm going to guess there will be people in your town that will remember what you did. And you're like 50 something, like that was a long while ago. So one's returning home from his criminal past, and Aaron's just coming home like he's a hometown boy. He's the one who stayed home. He's the one who was a slave. And also, how did he get to leave? Because they have to request of Pharaoh that they can leave for 3 days. How did Aaron get out of there other than did he have a 3-day weekend? We don't really know why he got to leave. Verse 29, it says the elders of Israel. Did you notice that? My thought when I was reading that is though they're slaves, there's still a form of community and authority within their community because they're Hebrew slaves, but even within that communal living area, like they still had elders of their people. Someone's in charge, yeah. The first mafia, something like that. Verse 30, this is an epic show and tell moment, isn't it? If we remember back to Exodus chapter 4, verse 3 through 9, what were the 3 signs that God told Moses? God had Moses do these things, and then he had him do 2 of them, and then he told them, when you get there, if they don't believe me, you're going to do these things. The staff turning into a snake, the diseased hand. He said, draw out water from the Nile River and pour it in the sand, and then it will become blood. It will turn from water to blood. And so, I know, right? But Moses, you really got to think, don't snatch humanity out of the moment. You got to imagine these 2 brothers that are seeing each other, and then they go and they stand before the elders of their people, and whether that's 20 people or 200 people, I'm going to guess it's closer to in the hundreds. But imagine Aaron is the mouthpiece. He's the one saying, God spoke to Moses, and this is what he said. And while he's doing it, Moses is doing a little illustrated sermon over here. I know, right? And it's not just Moses now by a burning bush picking up a snake. He's surrounded by the elders of his people. There's humanity in this moment, and he literally does all 3 of these signs, and the people are convinced, right? They're convinced of 2 things. They're convinced that the Lord actually sent Moses and Aaron. They see these signs, they hear the message, and they're convinced in this moment that God has chosen these 2 men and he has sent them to speak to us. So they're convinced. But they're also convinced of God's might and his mercy. Look again at verse 31. Then the people of Israel were convinced that the Lord had sent Moses and Aaron. And when they heard that the Lord was concerned about them and had seen their misery, they bowed down in worship. They were convinced that God had sent them, and they were convinced that God was mighty. He was able to do mighty things to show himself strong through these miracles. But they were convinced that God was merciful enough that he cared about them. That God was merciful enough that he saw them in their suffering. Don't we need that even? What is the quote that a grief must be witnessed? A grief demands a witness. I think that's the quote, that grief demands a witness. We grieve privately, but grief demands a witness. We need someone to see that we're hurting. We need someone to affirm that, yes, you're hurting. Yes, what you went through was horrible. And these people feel that now. They feel like God saw these 400 years when it was quiet, and I say silent loosely, because though God did not speak, he wasn't silent. He was still sovereignly moving in the affairs of humanity, right? And so they're moved at the knowledge that God saw them. And because God saw them, he sent somebody. He sent somebody to help them. I think that God sends us people a lot, and sometimes we don't notice it. God sends us someone to encourage us or to help us with the task, and we sometimes think it's just chance they were there. Man, I wonder how many times God sent someone. Mary, do you know, like 3 years ago, God sent us to your door because that day you needed somebody. You needed someone to love you, and Pastor Stephanie was the woman coming into your home. I think I don't know, did she bring you muffins? What did she do? Yeah. Yeah. Like, can I share just briefly? Mary has a son that passed away several years ago, and Easter was kind of that marker that it was his birthday. And we had done some door-to-door witnessing, inviting people to church. Mary, God orchestrated somebody to come to your door that day because you needed it. It wasn't a chance happening like that. That was God saying, Mary, I saw your suffering and I saw your pain, and I knew that you needed a friend, and I knew you needed a church. I knew you needed the people of God. And so I'm going to send somebody. Like, that's what God did for them. That's what God did for you. And I think he does it so many more times than we know, that he just sends someone. It's like these divine appointments where it's a divine setup where he's orchestrating and moving. Let me ask you this question. Is it easier for you to be convinced of God's might or his mercy concerning your life? Y'all tracking with that? Are you more convinced that he's mighty and can help you, or is it easier to be convinced that he's merciful and wants to help you? Mercy. You wonder why, yeah. That's a real, why would you ever want to help me? I'm a mess up, yeah. Yeah. Right. I will just speak for myself. I never doubt God's might and his ability, but sometimes I doubt his desire to help me, you know? Like that's, I just speaking freely. I know he loves me, but it's so much easier for me to think God can help me, but why would you want to help me? Yeah, I'm a dork. You saw what I did this morning. Why would you ever want to help me? So it's so much easier to believe in his might than his mercy. But I love that they were convinced of both. That God showed them that I saw you in your suffering. I saw you when your body was broken down because of the slavery and the harsh conditions. I saw every tear. I know what you walked through. Oh, so good. Let's look at chapter 5, verse 1 through 5. It says, after this presentation to Israel's leaders, Moses and Aaron went to speak to Pharaoh. Now, please do this with me as I read. Please track mentally. Please almost get a movie reel in your head that you're literally picturing what's happening and piecing all these little nuggets together. So after the presentation to Israel's leaders, Moses and Aaron went and spoke to Pharaoh. They told him, this is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says. Let my people go so that they may hold a festival in my honor in the wilderness. "Is that so?" retorted Pharaoh. "And who is the Lord? Why should I listen to him and let Israel go? I don't know the Lord, and I will not let Israel go." But Aaron and Moses persisted. "The God of the Hebrews has met with us," they declared. "So let us take a 3-day journey into the wilderness so we can offer sacrifices to the Lord our God. If we don't, he will kill us." Most translations say he may kill us with a plague or with the sword. And Pharaoh replied, "Moses and Aaron, why are you distracting the people from their tasks? Get back to work. Look, there are many of your people in the land, and you're stopping them from their work." Okay, the first passage we saw Moses and Aaron's obedience. This one we see Pharaoh's obstinance. He was obstinate in this passage. Obstinate, no, because they all started with an O. The actual word is obstinacy, but obstinate, Obstinence. He was obstinate to God, to Moses and Pharaoh. Let's answer this question. Moses says, "Let my people go," right? And I'll tell you that for most of my life, I've sang the song, "Pharaoh, Pharaoh, oh baby, let my people go." Yeah. Do you not know that? How do you work with children and you don't know? Yeah, that's That's literally how you're supposed to do it. And Alyssa, I'm not sure you're allowed to work with kids if you don't know that. Okay. So when I've sang that my whole life, I always, we've taught kids that song for years. And Pharaoh, Pharaoh, let my people go, and then you do the whole thing. When I was reading that, when I was singing it, when I've read it, I've always heard it. Moses says, "Let my people go." That Moses is going to Pharaoh and he's saying, "These are my kinsmen. These are my brethren. These are my peeps. Let my people go." But I don't think that's really what he's saying, because the quotations matter, don't they? Look at the second line there. "This is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says." Who is Moses speaking on behalf of? They're speaking on behalf of God. It is not Moses saying, "Let my bros go." He's saying for God. It's like he's saying, "Thus saith the Lord, you better let his people go. You let God's people go." Y'all see the difference? And that does make a difference, doesn't it? God is saying, "Let my people go." Yeah, I'll be the one putting the words in your mouth. Exactly. Verse 2, do you think Pharaoh's response is sincere? There are many gods in their culture, after all, right? Could it be sincere? Could Pharaoh literally, when he says, "Is that so? And who is the Lord? Why should I listen to him and let the Israel go? I don't know the Lord, and I will not let Israel go." Do you think that's sincere, or what do you think that is really happening there? Corey?
I think he may not know God like the Israelites know God, but he obviously knows of their God. So to me, it's sarcasm.
Yeah. Brenda, what were you getting ready to say?
And their God, I said that. He knows their God.
Yeah.
They had stuff, what do they call them? Idols and stuff that they would.
Oh, yeah.
They didn't know that God, the Spirit, they had idols and stuff.
Ra, yeah.
Yeah, they didn't, so therefore, he probably thought what he said.
I think, Lon,
They were polytheistic
culture.
They had a lot of gods, and when we get to the 10 plagues, the reason that God chose those 10 plagues is they had a God that every single.
Shh, slow your jets, buddy. We're going to get there in a few weeks. Dang.
I really think that when he's saying, "I don't know your God," he's like, "I got enough of my own gods. I don't need another one."
Yeah. I find it difficult to think that the Israelite people had lived there 400 years and that the Pharaoh would not have at least known that they had their own God. He wouldn't have had dinner with them.
No. So therefore, he wouldn't know,
When you're in charge, you hear every word that's going on. Like you're
Yeah,
in
the
charge.
overseers here, the people.
Yeah.
They report back, but I don't think it would, you know, but,
I think he probably knew that they had a God, Sarah.
I think he knew that they had a God, but he doesn't know, like, I don't recognize your God, so why do I care?
Right.
Doesn't know it.
Right.
and their
I,
gods didn't speak.
yeah.
You know, they didn't speak to him, so how would he know? Okay, how am I supposed to know you're telling me the truth?
Yeah. This next thought here, I think that this is more accurate. I believe that a more accurate portrayal of what he would said is, I don't acknowledge your Lord's authority. I don't acknowledge your Lord's authority. He said, you says these are his people, but they're my people. Like, I think that's what Pharaoh would have thought, is they're actually my people. They're not some fake God that you have. They're my people. And why would I acknowledge his authority? Lon?
I think he's also thinking, well, where's your God been for 400 years then? He's allowed us to do whatever we want with your people.
Yeah.
And all you've done is stayed under our authority, and so, you know,
Corey, can you come back with the mic? They're just dropping too many truth bombs for it to not be on the video. Like, if you're home watching, we want you to be able to hear the brilliance that is pouring forth from these beautiful mouths. So, so Corey, just be ready. Just sense when someone's going to say something brilliant. All right. Yeah. Okay, verse 3 raises two questions for me as I was reading it today. And I'm going to tell you that the majority of scholarly work really doesn't address one of these. In the 3 commentaries I looked at today, none of them addressed the question that I have. It feels like it's a hard issue to look at. The first one, though, was the 3-day request a bait and switch tactic? Because I don't think Moses wasn't coming back. If it was just to go into the desert to honor the Lord and to have a festival, you would have taken the men. I don't think you would have taken all the women and children. So was this a bait and switch? Or was it a test rocket to see what Pharaoh's going to say and do? I don't know. What are your thoughts? Jordan has something that is rolling through his mind. Did you sense that, Corey? It's there. I sensed it.
You can see his face. That helps a lot. Even when he was talking to God in the burning bush, he talked about how they would give them gifts when they left.
Yeah.
So this is not that. So I don't think this was ever the plan that we're going to go out there and then run away, because that wasn't the plan that God had already laid out.
Right.
So I think this was like, he's going to deny you. Put forth a very modest request.
Yeah.
It would be just rude to deny.
Yeah.
And let's see how obstinate he is.
Yeah. The one commentary that really did somewhat address this one question that I had, really kind of leaned on that side, was that it felt more like a test rocket, a test missile, that he is testing the waters. He's laying out a small thing. And if he's going to shoot him down on a small thing, this is not going to go well. And I do not believe that Moses here is lying. His intent isn't lying, because he is simply saying what God said. And these words for a 3-day journey to worship me are the words that God told him to say. So Moses and Aaron are being faithful to say and speak what God had told him. But the other thing that when I read it, I was like, what? Like, literally, I just kind of thought, what are you doing? Because even last week, where Moses finally gets on his pony and he's ready to go and obey God, and God's ready to kill him, makes you stop and ask questions. Why? I do not have an answer for this one, and I'm okay with that. Look at that line. If we don't, I underlined, if we don't, he will kill us with the plague or with the sword. I could not find this addressed in anything that I read in my preparation. So it was it's a different statement, and it made me wonder, like, why? I ask why a lot, don't I, hun? He looks so sad to nod his head, yes. Any thoughts, any perspectives that you might have on that?
Moses, or God is, through Moses, is warning the Pharaoh that plagues and killing by the sword and stuff is coming.
Okay, you think this is a foreshadowing. Okay, Sarah, what are your thoughts?
I think it's because he,
If we don't, he will kill us with the sword or with a plague.
to make the Pharaoh, like, to try to tug on his heartstrings and be like, do you want these people to die? Like, these are your people. If you just let them go, they won't die.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's,
like not an ultimatum, but saying, I got a cloud. But, like saying, not an ultimatum, but like saying, okay, you can let us go for 3 days. It's gonna be 3 easy days, or you can lose all these people, which is your
okay.
your labor force will be gone.
Okay, that's a good thought. Corey, it might help you if you stood up here so you could see their pretty faces. That's great. Like, I didn't read that in anything and I didn't think of that. Like, but that makes some sense right there. Bill Burblinger, come on. All right. Pharaoh's response is dismissive and defiant. I instantly pictured a fly swatter in my mind. Like, he just swatted them down like they were a bug and just dismissed them completely. Let's look at Exodus 5. Let's look at 6 through 12. The same day, Pharaoh sent this order to the Egyptian slave drivers. So you're picturing it. The same day, Moses and Aaron walk out. The same day, Pharaoh now sends this order to the Egyptian slave drivers and the Israelite foremen. So that's important to get these two pictures of who he sends the order to. He sends it to his own Egyptian muckety-muck, his own big people, and he sends the same message to the Israelites. And anytime you hear the words the Hebrew children or Israelite, you need to understand that that's interchangeable. They're the same people in this setting, okay? So he's sending a message to the higher-ups that are Egyptians that serve him, and he's sending the same message to the Israelite foremen, the people. Can you imagine having this job? Like, I read a lot of books.
It's the equivalent of the tax collectors.
The tax collectors, exactly. Like Matthew, who was a Jew, was a tax collector who was taking money from his own people. If you read any books of like plantation life and slaves and on a plantation, that sometimes they would put their own people over their people, you know what I'm saying? And which it feels cruel. That just feels like it's adding a whole another level of cruelty, that you've got to be the rat. You got to be the one in charge. So now let's back up. Verse 7. This is his message. Do not supply any more straw for making brick. Make the people get it themselves, but still require them to make the same number of bricks as before. Don't reduce the quota. They are lazy. That's why they're crying out, let us go and offer sacrifices to our God. Load them down with more work. Make them sweat. That will teach them to listen to lies. So the slave drivers and the foremen went out and they told the people, this is what the Pharaoh says. I will not provide any more straw for you. Go and get it yourselves. Find it wherever you can, but you must produce just as many bricks as before. So the people scattered throughout the land of Egypt in search of stubble to use as straw. So one of the things I did today is I'm studying, I'm looking, and like, the straw worked to reinforce these clay bricks. It almost served as rebar when you pour concrete, that you've got that actually adds some structural support in the concrete. Did I do good, guys? Yeah. I did so good. Yeah. A binder, yes. But it added support and structure to it. And so without that, it would have fallen apart. It needed that. I know I did good. And then to the stubble was just an excess part of the harvest that was kind of left over. It is what it sounds like, stubble, like it's kind of worthless. In this passage, we see Pharaoh's oppression. his oppression. We saw before that he was obstinate. Now he doubles down. Now he's not just using words. Now he's doubling down and being oppressive. Lon, hold on, Corey's running. Good.
The thing about the stubble is what's left over after the straw is taken up.
Okay.
It's all the tiny little particles of straw that's left over that fell out of the straw.
So it's more tedious to
So
collect.
it's harder to collect. They would have had to work harder to get the same quantity to make bricks.
Yeah. What did you saying, thinking how? A fine powder. So, yeah, so it would be so much more tedious, wouldn't it, to get more laborious to collect, and then you would have even needed more because it wouldn't have been structural. So this is bad. Totalitarian leaders, they see threats to their authority and rule, and they respond with more oppression. Y'all get that? They see everything, little things are a threat, and so they just double down and they're even more oppressive. Insecure leaders, he's a totalitarian leader for sure, but even think about even in your own workplaces, if you've ever had an insecure boss, insecure leaders resort to insults and name calling. That's why he says they're lazy. Y'all, we're seeing this on our political field right now. These people are insecure, and it is on both sides. And it's even more on one side, like the name calling, the ridiculous language that people are using. Why are they doing that? Because they're insecure. I have to step on you to build myself up. And that's what he's doing. These are not lazy people. Linda. Okay. The oppression was to make their work ridiculously impossible, resulting in punishment. There was no way they were going to be able to accomplish what the Pharaoh ordered. That was the point. Yeah, that's not fair, exactly. And the point literally was he literally set them up to fail. He gave them an impossible job so that he could be even more oppressive. This is like you've got Moses who cares about liberation, and you've got a Pharaoh who cares about oppression. That like God's getting ready to deliver his people and to set them free. Carla.
I'm thinking that he probably figured too that if he had them beat down enough, they wouldn't want to go anywhere.
Oh, that's good. Carla said he's probably figuring that if he has them beat down enough, they can't go anywhere. Yeah, that's good. Okay, anything before we move on to this last chunk?
I had one question.
Yeah.
Back here, where it says Pharaoh's respond to the dismay and the defeat. How many times do we as people not pay attention when God tells us? I'm sorry.
No, that's good.
That's even in our own lives, when we know, He wants us to do, even that's something we do, we don't pay, I do, when Harrington goes, I don't want to do that, I don't want to do it. You know what I mean?
So you're saying that's a good thought. Where it says Pharaoh's response was dismissive and defiant. How many times have I responded to the command of God dismissing it? And sometimes defiant. Yeah. Now, I'm not going to do that, Lord. Like, no way. That's not for me. You can do this to somebody else, but not for me. No, Corey.
So on the front line, the slave drivers and the Israelite foreman, I find it interesting that this is what Pharaoh says. I wonder what was going through their head, like, man, we really shouldn't be doing this, and our boss is telling us to, or that's where my thought goes with all this. So I obviously don't have an answer. But
Yeah. Jordan.
We look at when Moses and Aaron came before Pharaoh, they said, this is what God said. And they lay all these things out. This is what you need to do. This is what needs to happen. And Pharaoh says, no, they need to get back to work. Let me show you what a command with authority looks like. This is what Pharaoh says. You're going to work even harder. The straw that I graciously gave you, you're going to have to go get yourself. This is the real world. Don't listen to these people. They're just going to make you have more work. I'm in charge. There is no God for you. That's what Pharaoh's trying to
That's why he says that. That's why they listen to lies. That's what he said. Yeah. Yeah. All right, let's look at this last chunk. Verse 13. Meanwhile, I love the word meanwhile. Meanwhile, the Egyptian slave drivers continued to push hard. Meet your daily quotas of brick, just as you did when we provided you with straw, they demanded. Then they whipped the Israelite foreman that they had put in charge of the work crews. Y'all, are you tracking that? These are the guys who stood before Pharaoh and heard the command and went and dished it out, standing next to the Egyptian leaders. And now the Egyptian leaders, instead of beating the people's backs, they're beating their backs. This is not good. Why haven't you met your quotas either yesterday or today, they demanded. So the Israelite foreman went to Pharaoh and they pleaded with him. Please don't treat your servants like this, they begged. We are given no straw, but the slave drivers still demand, make bricks. We are being beaten, but it isn't our fault. Your own people are to blame. But Pharaoh shouted. Got to notice that. Pharaoh shouted. Now you've got an enraged ruler, and he's shouting, you're just lazy, lazy. That's why you're saying, let us go and offer sacrifices to the Lord. Now get back to work. No straw will be given to you, but you must still produce the full quota of brick. The Israelite foreman could see that they were in serious trouble when they were told, you must not reduce the number of bricks you make each day. And as they left Pharaoh's courts, they confronted Moses and Aaron, who were waiting outside for them. The foreman, who is a Hebrew child, he is an Israelite, the foreman said to them, may the Lord judge and punish you for making us stink before Pharaoh and his officials. You have put a sword into their hands, an excuse to kill us. Okay, let's break this down. In this passage, we see the Hebrews' opposition. We see that they are opposing Moses and Aaron now. Whereas in the first chunk, they believed, didn't they? They were convinced that this was God's plan. Now we move ahead just a tiny bit, and now they're confronting Moses and Aaron. When the people got the news of the workload change, they were angry. And when the Israelite foremen are beaten for not meeting the quota, they're angry at Moses. Right? Yes.
They fell for the trick. Pharaoh's like, beat the ones that we like that listen to us and do what we say, and then run boss over them.
Yeah.
And that'll scare them enough.
Yeah.
And they will be silent, and they will believe.
Mm-hmm.
They did.
It may have been that Pharaoh knew that he could divide the Jews by creating complaints. He may have known. You don't get to be Pharaoh if you're an idiot, do you? You don't get to be the ruler of a land if you're stupid. There's a good chance that he understood that we will be your people, your leaders, and we will then cause division. We're going to punish Moses and Aaron by punishing your people. This is something Dougie and Jonah, don't be mad at me, but this is something I've done to Pearl often to threaten her to get her to do something. I will threaten to put Gandalf in a closet. Gandalf is our cat. I've never done it, but it gets her to move. I would say to her, Pearl, if you don't go do the dishes right now, I'm going to put Gandalf in a dark closet. Because I understood that Gandalf would just lay in there and be fat and happy. But my thought was always, I'll hurt you by hurting your people, by hurting your cat. Does that make sense? I haven't actually done it, so don't be mad, okay? It's the thought. Lonnie.
One thing I hadn't realized until catching the words like meanwhile and that same day is this is all happening all the same day. It's not like a week is transpiring in these few verses. And so when Pharaoh's telling them you have to keep your quota, and the slave drivers are saying you didn't even make your quota yesterday, when we did give you straw.
Yeah, this is a daily quota. Yeah, that's important to notice. Later in the desert, the devil uses the same complaining tactic to try and stop God's plan. So here's the thought. If division and opposition was Pharaoh's plan, it was working, wasn't it? It was working like a charm. Here's where we're going to end tonight. I want us to think through this last thought. What did the Israelite foreman do? The Hebrew children, what did their foreman do after they were whipped cruelly for not being able to do the impossible? What did they do? They went to Pharaoh and they complained. And actually, they didn't complain.
They reported thinking that the slave drivers were mistreating them and that Pharaoh would do something.
They begged. Look at the end of verse 15. Please don't treat your servants like this. They begged. They went begging and pleading for not to have to do what is being done. So their first response to opposition was to go beg to a dictator, an evil dictator. That was their first response. Then they went to blame Moses and Aaron. They're dismissed from the tyrant, and they go out and they attack the messenger, don't they? They attack the messenger. What should have been their first response? Prayer. This struck me today as I was preparing, like thinking of their first response to opposition was to cower in fear to the very one that enslaved them. Y'all track with that? Like that's serious. I think of any addiction in your life. Think of any addiction. If you're addicted to food, if alcohol is your drug of choice, if you're addicted to shopping or gambling or pornography, whatever that thing is that holds you bound and enslaved, when you hit opposition and you're stressed to the max, what do you run to? Right? I saw a post the other day from someone, I know this man's in recovery. He is trying, and he lashed out in a social media post, and his first thing was, I want to go get this thing. I want to go do this thing. That is human nature, isn't it? To want to do that. Y'all, that's mind-bending to me, that the very thing that enslaves me is the very thing that I run to do. The more common addiction in this room for the people of God is going to be food. Okay, like that's something that most of us can understand. I hate that food would have a hold on me. And yet when I'm stressed, I want to go eat something. I'm gonna make a confession to you. When I leave Wednesday mornings, when I go to Sunset, the nursing home, do you know what I do? I go to Motomart and I treat myself with a Diet Mountain Dew. Every time. I do that. Do you know what I'm saying? Like we treat we take the thing that binds us, and that's the thing we run to when we're scared and opposed. And I think this is what they did. They're scared and they run to the very person that was their prison guard. Alyssa. 400 years of learned behavior, yeah. We have the benefit of hindsight that we can look back at their story, don't we? We can look back at what they did, and I just wonder for your own life, do you ever catch yourself running to the very thing that holds you captive? You have a bad day and you run to that thing, even though you hate it and you feel enslaved to it, and yet you run to it. Please show me I'm not the only one who gets, like running to the familiar, yeah. They ran to what they thought was going to be the answer and that had the power, instead of recognizing that they were convinced that this was God's plan and God was with them in the beginning, but the first opposition, they buckle. Lon.
They also came to this point they also came to this point of tying the worst conditions to this this person who just now showed up.
Yeah.
And so it wasn't, we didn't have it this bad before you got here. It was good. Remember the good old days?
Yes, yes.
When we didn't have air conditioning, but we also didn't have windows to roll down. All we had was a horse-drawn cart. That was the good old.
Yeah.
And so, I think that's the other side, because even again, if you fast forward to when they're going through,
It's just a preview, isn't it?
it's so much better in Egypt. We at least had food to eat. We at least had.
Yeah. This is an absolute preview of what is to come, that they're always going to look back at the good old days and how easy it was, that we forget things. What should we do? What should we do first when faced with opposition or oppression or opposition? What scripture can you use to support your answer? When you face opposition, when you face some oppression, what should you do first? Alyssa? Go to God.
Yeah, prayer, and I think of the verse, be anxious for nothing, but in everything through prayer and
Supplication. Yeah.
supplication. That's the one I'm thinking of. He was like, that's a math thing. Supplication, and present your requests to him. Like,
That's good.
willing to listen, you might as well, you gotta ask, you know?
Yeah.
And say, hey, I'm struggling. How are we gonna get through this, God? I need
Right.
help."
Right. Good. Supplication does sound like a math term. Yeah, if you're a 7 or 8, yeah. What else? What should be our first line of response? Carla.
Jeremiah 29:11 says, "For I know the plans I have for you, plans for your good." God knows what's planned for us. We just got to trust and remember that He has a plan.
Okay, remind ourselves. What I hear you saying is when I'm faced with that, I need to stop and remind myself. Lon?
When you've done all you can do to stand. When you've done all you can do to stand.
Stand. Yeah. When you've done all you can do to stand, stand.
Philippians always get 4:13, 13.
I can do all things through Christ who gives me strength. How about this? Seek ye first the kingdom of God and his righteousness. When I am faced with oppression and opposition, rather than running to the thing that is binding me, rather than running to the person that is easy target. You know, if you're in a relationship like Lonnie and I, we know we're safe. And sometimes you can let loose on the person you love the most because you know they love you and they're like, they can see you at your worst. And you know what I'm saying? No. Can't do that to him. No letting loose. But you know that that's a safe person and they're still going to love you even when they see. Back to this. Seek first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and all these things will be added unto you. Seek first the kingdom of God. Instead of seeking the thing that binds us, instead of seeking retribution, that's what they were trying to do. They were trying to find a way out instead of finding a way through, instead of seeking the Lord.
Always trying to make it easier on, because, you know what I mean, they felt that they took all that away, they couldn't.
Yeah.
You like trying to tell me, go pick up kids and give me a rope and with knots on it and getting them to school.
Get all the kids to school, Linda. Let's cross the bridge. We got about 2 minutes. Let's cross that bridge real quick. We're going to cross the bridge from their town to ours. What is a principle? We have to cross a principle bridge because the story, if I take the story and just say I have to do what Moses did, that means I go to find an evil dictator and say, let God's people go. Like, that's not the principle. That's the detail and the fact of the story. But if God's word is applicable to our life today, then we have to be able to take a narrative passage from the Old Testament and find a principle that crosses the bridge from their town to ours. What's a principle? And I'll give you a second to think. I'll give you my first one. Sometimes doing God's will means we will face opposition. I'll carry that further. Sometimes doing God's will means that I may face opposition from the household of faith. It's not always the enemy of my soul that opposes me. For Moses and Aaron, it was the people that they were sent to rescue and help that opposed them. So for me, that was a principle that crossed from their town to mine, that sometimes even doing God's will still mean it hurts. Brent.
Sometimes it's, you know, I'm getting a little bit ahead of the story, but one of the principles you can get from this is, you know, we kept going back to Pharaoh. You have to persist, keep persisting, trust God, and will deliver. Or people will show up, you know.
Yeah.
We went asked one time, God did a plague, and also Pharaoh said, go, right? It wasn't like that. It was, so sometimes your answer has to come through
Good. Persistence. Corey.
I see the very end there where they're blaming Moses, and I take out of it that you need to hold people accountable that need to be held accountable.
Yeah.
It's not Moses' fault. And sometimes God's going to be the one that serves the justice.
Yeah.
Not us. So.
Right. Any other principles to cross the bridge? There's no testimony without a test. And they were going to have a great testimony, weren't they? Because they're about to face some pretty major tests.
I think we can kind of see that, sometimes in pivotal moments where God's going to do something big in your life, it's going to feel like everything is against you. Like it's going to get worse than it's ever been.
Yeah.
Because God is on his way to make something amazing happen.
That's good.
That's like your last test, you know. If you can persevere, if you can stand through that time where God's timing comes through, you know, you're going to be edified in the end.
Yeah. Sometimes things get worse before they get better. I remember when I was a teenager, my goodness, I just had a season of acne that was just horrible. It was so terrible. And I remember getting a prescription medicine, and the doctor warned me. He said, it's going to get worse before it gets better. And my goodness, was he right. I felt like a scaly lizard for about 2 weeks just because it dries your whole face out. And I've never forgotten that it did get worse, but it got better. And sometimes the doing God's will, it might mean things are going to get a little worse sometimes before it gets better. Yeah. Anything else?
When we go to serve God, we do lose, things do feel like they're getting worse because you lose some friends, you lose some people around you. And
Yeah.
your mind tells you, well, I don't want to, I gotta lose, I don't have nobody. Because
Yeah.
you feel like you fit in church, you don't feel like you fit in over here, and then you're out there all alone.
Sometimes standing for God means you stand alone. Yeah. That's good. One more. Hala. Takes perseverance. Yeah. The wheels of God don't move on a dime sometimes. Some they can, because God's sovereign and can do whatever he wants. But God works over time. God could have prevented them from being in slavery for 400 years, couldn't he? Like, God could have done that. God could have, listen, God walked them through on dry ground. In a second, he parts the sea. God can do the miraculous, but man, sometimes the growth comes through persistence and waiting and seeing God move over and over again. Anything else? We're done. Anything else before I say amen? Jordan.
Let me say, you know, God's not just writing your story. You know, when the timing feels wrong to you and it feels like something
Good.
should have happened, it could be something God's working on in somebody else's life that needs to line up first.
That's good.
And so, I don't know, I just keep coming back to John 16:33. I've told you these things so that in me you may have peace. In this world you will have trouble, but take heart, I have overcome the world.
That's good.
So sometimes what we need to do is after we do the praying, after we midst of bad things happening, God's still in control. He still has a plan. He's overcome the world.
That's good. That's good. I hope you guys caught that. Jordan started off by saying, God's not just writing your story. He's writing other people's story. We just get written in sometimes and take hope, take courage. He's overcome the world so we can have hope and courage. Let's close in prayer.